Immediately upon firing this game up after a couple Elden Ring playthroughs, my first thought was, yep, this is just more of the same. I suppose you're bound to run into that if you play several games from the same series in a row, though as the game progressed, I grew fond of its distinct quality. It exceeded many of my expectations and perhaps surpassed its superseder. Dark Souls 3 has a linear structure, though linear isn't the most accurate word to describe it. It is an open world, so it's segmented so you can't freely roam in one direction for a long stretch of time. I prefer this structure as it stops you getting off the beaten path and wandering into the wrong neighbourhood early. I had a comment or two on the Elden Ring video saying there isn't such thing as being underleveled in a Souls game because you can beat any boss at any level, but come on, not all of us are masochists. At least Dark Souls 3 is more focused in the path that the Ashen One must take. Now, you can delve to the deepest pits of Lothric Castle and find some unfathomable horrors, or go snooping where you shouldn't. You'll still find some hard bastards that will walk you like a dog. There are still a few obnoxious runbacks, a few areas also have questionable enemy placement, and I'll never be a fan of the status effects, like poison or cursing. These are all part of the experience, but I, as well as most people I imagine, would prefer if these status effects weren't in the game, but whatever. The various zones all still amount to what is a behemoth, expertly crafted world. There are so many tucked away nooks and crannies. Thorough exploration is rewarded because there is always something in these hidden areas, whether it be an item or a new boss. Not that the item will always apply to you, but that's the fun of it. You never know what you're gonna get. Also, I can't say for sure, but it certainly seems like there's a lot more illusory walls in this game. They're everywhere, but to balance this, they do seem a lot easier to spot. And if you're playing online, like most people will, the floor messages will let you know if you're in front of one. There's a few shitty areas, but overall this game is much easier than the last two games I played, those being Bloodborne and Elden Ring. The boss's attack patterns just were a lot easier to predict, for me personally anyway. A lot of them actually had comparable wind-up animations and such, so in a way, the skills and experience you gain from beating one boss will transfer to the next, just like your character's in-game experience or souls. I struggled more with the regular enemies, to be honest. Some of these areas are absolutely smothered in enemies, all more than avoidable, but if you like to fight them, give me a huge pain in the arse. You'll never get a fair one-on-one, you're always going to be fighting 3 to 4 enemies at once. It's a nightmare, man. It does pay to be patient and learn every enemy's pattern to an extent. That being said, I can understand why a lot of people might run through this game underleveled, because they don't want to fight all these fucking stupid enemies. This is also the case for Bloodborne and Elden Ring alike. You suffer through the standard enemies to get to the cool-ass boss fights. And this game is heaving with cool-ass boss fights. Yundek's Jundir, the tutorial boss, is a perfect introduction to the game. In fact, this whole area is the perfect introduction. Enemies are scattered and weak enough for you to gather your bearings. Then you'll approach him, rip the sword from his chest. Any adept Souls player should take this guy out in one attempt, but for someone brand new to the series, this is the perfect starting nemesis. The Abyss Watchers. At the time, I denounced this fight, but in hindsight, it's actually pretty well executed and unique. You fight this guy, and then another guy, and then another guy, but now he's attacking them? What the fuck is going on? You'll panic dodge around the arena as the third watcher whittles down the health of the leader, and if you're a fucking moron like me, you'll prematurely celebrate. Probably the easiest boss I've ever faced in my entire fucking— No. 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 The Soul of Cinder is obviously one of the best, as he is the face of the game. This game excels with its humanoid bosses, and those have always been more interesting to me than giants and dragons. Also, the music for this fight is top notch, man. Hearing the 3 piano notes amongst the harsh operatics. Affection. Nameless King is another highlight. A hard hitter, but his attack patterns are pretty transparent. Yeah, he's pretty tough, but if you have a focused build, you'll make short work of him. I ran a dex build through this game and was told that that wasn't the meta. However, I never felt like I would have been doing better running a strength or intelligence build. I never felt as though my style was hard countered by any boss. I picked the Uchigatana early on and stuck with it for the entire playthrough. I have a similar qualm here as I did with Bloodborne. If you get one weapon and upgrade it a lot, it's a pain in the ass to get another weapon and also upgrade it a lot. It's pretty easy to upgrade it to say +6, but past that point it can get kinda obnoxious. It's annoying that a lot of your power is tied to the level of your weapon because, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but it doesn't really give you incentive to switch your weapons around and try different playstyles. Of course, to some this is a good thing as it offers replay value, and to an extent I agree, but for those who are only intending to do one playthrough, it's best to just pick a weapon you like and stick with it. If you're willing to grind though, there are tons of great weapons. And you'll have a blast scraping through these areas. Every single one feels lived in by these half-human creatures and giant beasts. That's one thing I can always give these games credit for. They can get a little repetitive, but they're never boring to look at. Your allies are much more interesting in this game than Bloodborne or Elden Ring. Andre is a fun, enthusiastic blacksmith.
Pretty be careful. I don't want to see my work squandered.
The Firekeeper is a calming presence in this lonesome land of Lothric, always there whenever you return to the shrine. Speaking of, the shrine, another source of comfort, a true home for the player. Bloodborne's Hunter's Dream was comforting but feels kinda eerie, and the Round Table is just unintuitive. The shrine is the best hub area in the Souls games I've played thus far. One of my biggest critiques for Elden Ring was its missed opportunities for a more embellished story. And before you comment talking shit, I also ended that video saying it's not really fair to judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree. From Software's method of world building and storytelling has always been more read between the lines than anything. Dark Souls 3 is no different, however the story is even more subdued, so I was never left wanting more in the first place. And even if I did, it wouldn't matter because it's not really the focus of these games and I doubt it ever will be. From Software put the level design and gameplay loop first, which is the main reason why it has a die-hard core fanbase in the first place. Now, the DLC is split into two. Pack 1 is Ashes of Ariandel, Pack 2 is The Ringed City. I decided to judge these on their own merits and less as an extension of the original game, as I feel it's more fair. I don't think it is fair to let this optional content affect the standard content from the base game, because I'd say Dark Souls 3 is the perfect length, but if you whack the DLC on the end of it and consider it all one long game, I'd then say it drags slightly. Enter the painted world of Ariandel and damn. Immediately I need to reaffirm how fucking gorgeous this game looks. This area is more of what you'd come to expect, just with more challenging enemies. Not the fun kind of challenging, the DLC is where it teeters into petty territory. You make your way through and get to the first boss, or what looks like the first boss, though he's reserved for the second phase. First phase is Sister Fried alone. Took a few attempts, but I was able to get to the second phase, where you have to take on both her and Father Ariandel simultaneously. This can be quite overwhelming because not only are you avoiding their regular attacks,
oh god, you wouldn't belong getting frostbite,
and they will attack you at the same time, you're also avoiding their ranged elemental attacks. This took me a good 20 attempts. Honestly, this phase is somewhat trivialized if you prioritize your distance and attack the Father when he is vulnerable. You can cut off large chunks of the shared health bar when you get numerous combos on him from behind once he's gassed out. You know something else that trivializes the second phase? The fact that there's a third one, beyond a joke, man. One attempt, I seriously got it down to like 1mm of HP and got sloppy. I choked, and then the subsequent 20 attempts all ended in the first phase because I was so deflated. All in all, decent boss, but the sound design really fucking threw me off in the first phase. Normally my complaints with the bosses are all in the moment, and I grow to appreciate them after I've defeated them, but Fried can turn invisible during her first and third phases, though it is the most egregious during the first phase because she'll fly out of her invisible state and impale you with her scythe. The sound cues for this attack are inconsistent as fuck. There's footsteps, an exhale, and then an unsheathing of a blade. Now her attack will always come after that last sound effect, but it could literally be immediately after or 4 to 5 seconds after. I would appreciate some consistency here. How on earth am I meant to know when to dodge the attack if I can't see them and what I'm hearing also doesn't tell me where they are? This first phase screams not good enough for base game, scrap for now, if we make DLC we'll make use of it. And in all honesty, the entirety of the second DLC also kind of feels like this. It feels rushed. It's about the same length as the first DLC, now just incredibly bloated with abysmal enemy placement and design. The only saving grace is the Slave Knight Gale fight, an incredible spectacle with a banging theme too. But once you beat him, that's it, basically, game is done. No additional cutscene or anything. So in conclusion, the base game was pretty good, but the DLC is kind of spotty. Some parts are, some parts aren't. This game absolutely shines on its boss fights, which is the main appeal of the game anyway, so at least it gets that part right. Thematically, it has more variety and more to look at than Bloodborne, for example. But there's not a lot that's incredibly memorable about the world, just select bosses, and even the bosses themselves, I remember the experience of the fight and not any dialogue spoken beforehand or anything. It's a great game, probably the perfect entry point for anyone trying to get into the Souls series, but I'm not really in a rush to replay it personally. Maybe one day I will, but, you know, for now, on to the next big thing. Thanks for watching, stay tuned.